Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Yeah? Okay, yeah. I like enthusiastic audiences, so it's like, yeah! I know this is Utah, but come on, let's get a little enthusiasm. No, that's great. That's what I like to hear. That's what I like to hear. Now, okay, now that I don't know that that's 100% true, but anyway. So yeah, my name is Ed Finkler, and this talk's called Stronger Than Fear, Mental Health in the Developer Community, and it is part of a campaign that I do called Open Sourcing Mental Illness. The idea being that there's a lot of stuff we either don't talk about or that we don't know about mental health issues that if we did talk about more, we could do a lot better in terms of treating, interacting with folks, improving productivity and the life of people who deal with this stuff. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of background on that. Now, the first thing is like, well, who am I? Now, I've been a web developer for about 20 years. I'm a dad and I'm a husband. I'm a musician sometimes, mostly computer stuff. And I'm a big nerd. I do lots of nerdy stuff, and I get, you know, I like to collect movies, and I like to collect vintage video game consoles and other nerdy stuff like that. But I also have a couple mental health issues, a couple diagnosed mental illnesses, as they would call them. Now, I'm just a person. I guess everybody's a person, right? But I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychologist. I don't have formal training in that kind of stuff. I am certified in mental health first aid, which is a course that you can take, and I'll talk about that in a minute, well, in a few minutes. But I'm here to talk about what it's like to have a mental health issue as a developer and as just a regular person, but also to talk about how this impacts us culturally as a society, and the attitudes that we have within the mental health, or excuse me, within the developer community, and how they contribute to us maybe not getting the help that we need and deserve. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an informal survey, and this is going to require audience participation. So get your arms ready and like loosened up and stuff like that, and get ready to scream really loud and things of that nature. Now, I've got a question for you. How many of you need to wear glasses or contacts, or know someone who does? Okay, so pretty much everybody. That's good, I like that very good. So that's a very common thing that most of us either do or know somebody who needs some sort of ocular crutch or some sort of assistive device and really can't cope in society without it. There's laws that we can't operate vehicles usually if we can't see to some extent with an assisted device or something or otherwise. Now, I'm curious, I'm going to ask you a question about that and about this. How many of you would be afraid to tell a coworker that you have to wear glasses or contacts? Usually there's somebody who's kind of a smart aleck who says yes. So now, have you ever had somebody say to you, you're really not trying hard enough. Could you try harder so that you didn't need this assistive crutch? Has anyone here ever had that question? Okay, so a couple people probably had very poor childhoods. I'm sorry about that. And how about, have you tried squinting? Has anyone ever told you that? Okay, so nope. Okay, one person has apparently heard that. Okay, so we're quite accepting of this notion that many of us, because it's a very common thing, need assistance as we get older to see to an extent that we can operate normally within this society and within this culture. Now, let's see. A slightly more usually serious condition would be diabetes. And I have a dad who has diabetes, I have one dad who has diabetes, and I have a brother who had diabetes. So I'm kind of screwed genetically. But now I'm curious, I'm going to ask that same question that I asked about glasses and contacts. I'm going to ask about that diabetes. How many of you would feel comfortable talking to a coworker, let's say, about diabetes? Now, in the sense that I want to keep in mind, this maybe isn't what you lead with at the beginning of the day. Hey, how you doing? Diabetes. Maybe you don't do that. But how many of you raise your hand if you would be like, yeah, it comes up in conversation, I'm not going to freak out and be like, I got to excuse myself. Okay, so most people are comfortable with it, yeah. Right. Okay, so diabetes, it's the thing. If it's not treated, it is probably going to be fatal, right? Okay, so how about another thing? Cancer. I lost my brother to cancer this year. And it is a really, really sucky thing. And we've also lost 3 really amazing artists in the first month of 2016 from cancer. And that has been a gigantic bummer and reminded me of how much it sucks. But I want to ask that same question about cancer. You're with a coworker, but somebody you talk to. It's not like just some random person in another division that you never run into, but somebody who you work with. Would you feel comfortable if a discussion of cancer came up and discussing that, or would you be like, man, I got to check out? Yeah, raise your hand. Might not be what you lead with. Not sort of like the let's get the day started. I'm going to bring it up in my stand-up meeting. But yeah, okay, so, relatively, it's not exciting, right? It's not like, boy, this is gonna make me feel awesome. But yeah. Now I'm gonna ask you another question. How many of you would feel comfortable talking to, let's say, your boss about a mental health issue? Please raise your hand because I find this interesting. So not a lot of people. Not a lot of people, significantly fewer. Now, a boss, that's kind of more like, something bad might happen if I talk to them about that. How about a colleague, that person that you talk to at work, maybe every day or every other day? How comfortable would you feel? So a few more people, but still less. Quite a bit less than cancer, that's interesting. How about a friend or family member? Would you feel comfortable talking with them about that? So some, yeah, probably majority. Some wouldn't. Depends on your family. So I think that's interesting, and I want you guys to keep that in mind while we're talking about this. We're talking about how comfortable we are discussing these things on, in terms of, our social groups, and are we comfortable talking about this in the light of the impact of mental health issues. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this, but first, I'm going to talk a little bit about the stuff that I deal with, these diagnoses that I have. They call it comorbidity. When you have more than one diagnosis, which sounds like you're going to die twice. That is not the case. Hopefully I don't die from either of them. But I have 2 major things. I have generalized anxiety disorder. And, what that is that, a short version, is that I get anxious and have this sort of, to varying degrees, a fight or flight response, which is really what anxiety is. At times when it's not appropriate. Now, human beings have these kinds of responses, like actually depressive responses too, and anxiety responses. They have those because of certain things that might happen to them, like say, a lion is trying to attack me. That is a time where I have to figure out, well, either I'm going to punch this thing as hard as I can in its nose, which probably isn't going to work and I'm screwed anyway, or I'm going to run as fast as I can, which also probably won't work because the lion's faster than me. But one of those things, maybe I have a stick, maybe I have, something, it'll be like The Revenant and you kill a bear. I haven't seen that movie, but I think that's what it's about. It's just about a bear attacking a guy. Maybe it makes more sense if you've seen the trailer. Anyway, but the point is, that is an appropriate time to have a fight or flight response. It is not appropriate to have it when, here's a good example. Somebody says, hey, yeah, come meet me here and you can just take the bus. And I think to myself, oh crap, I have to take the bus. I don't know the rules of taking the bus, and there's some etiquette to it, and I don't really understand how to pay for it, and I feel like I get on that bus, and I'm gonna be a fool, and everyone's gonna be looking at me, and I start freaking out, and I'm like, no, I'm not gonna take the bus. I'm gonna spend like 10 times more money to take a taxi, or a Lyft, or some evil corporation like Uber, or things like that. I'm going to take that because that I sort of understand. I just hit things on my phone, and the car shows up and I get into it and I hope it's the right car. And then I go to my place and it's fine. I will pay $50 instead of like the $5 it would cost to take the bus. Or an example would be, I have at times, I remember one time I was going to meet some friends at a pub that's in town. It's this hipster pub called the Black Sparrow, and they were meeting up there, some friends of mine. It was like Twitter meetup, so people still do that, I guess, but we do. And we get together for local folks that we talk to on Twitter, and get together and just hang out. And we're having it at this place, and I'd never been in there before, and I was intimidated by it because there's apparently a bunch of cool people there because it's the hipster bar, and I'm not cool. And also, I went to it, and there's two doors. There's a door over here, and then about 10 feet over, there's a door over here. And I didn't know which door to go into. And I thought if I went in the wrong door, then somebody might be mad at me because I go in the wrong door. And I was just about to go back to my car and just go home. And then somebody texted me from inside and says, "Hey, we're inside, da 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 da." And I was like, okay, that was enough to push me over this great fear that I had, and I was like, okay, I'll walk in. And everything was fine. I had a great time. Everything was great. Totally cool. But when I'm on my own, I don't have a buddy to sort of like rely on and like bounce things off of and like say, hey, you don't know what you're doing either too, but I feel okay about that. If I'm on my own, I have severe anxiety, particularly about situations where I don't understand the rules and I don't understand the etiquette. And so it is so extreme that I will just avoid the situation entirely. And that manifests physically in a lot of ways. I get like a tightness in my chest, like right under my sternum. I get like a real big knot. I used to have IBS pretty badly, to the point where it was like I was afraid to go like 10 minutes away from a bathroom ever. Thankfully, that's gone away, and I can actually travel, and I've done some things, but it's almost gone. And but I used to. There's no way I could get on a plane ever. No way I would ever do that because I'm so afraid of doing that stuff. I also have something, well, they call it, it's not really adult ADHD anymore. That was what I was diagnosed with originally because it was adult as opposed to kids, but actually now they kind of seem to be thinking it's just all the same thing. Used to be the kind of thought, well, can adults really have that? Well, yes, they can. I certainly had it when I was a kid. I was not diagnosed until I was 27 or 28, but I have this too. And there's a couple different variations on it, which you can look up if you're real curious. But for me, the things I have is I oftentimes have trouble focusing. And it kind of comes and goes. I think it comes and goes based on things I've eaten, based on just how my day is going, based on where my mind is. Did I make sure to take my medication? And usually I do. But I have trouble focusing on stuff. I'll tend to jump from thing to thing. It's hard for me to kind of stay stuck on stuff. I tend to avoid things that are not appealing to me. Sometimes nothing's appealing to me, but I will tend to, if there's something that I'm kind of not excited about doing, or it seems like kind of trudgy work, and there's times where I could get through it and I'm okay, but there's also times where it's like, this seems nigh impossible for me to do. It is so intimidating, and it's also deeply frustrating because I know that logically I can do it, but everything in my brain and all the emotions I'm having, all the feelings I'm having are saying like, you cannot do this. It's the last thing I want to do. I also have a low frustration threshold. So if something is I tend to get more frustrated. It depends on the task, but my tendency is I will get frustrated faster if I feel like I don't know what I'm doing and something is really just not working. I tend to get frustrated more quickly. And I also tend to have more intense emotions, and that's something that is difficult to deal with. So if I get kind of upset, some people, it's kind of like, well, they feel a little upset and they don't, it's not really a big deal. That's sort of like the sort of neurotypical reaction. Well, my emotions tend to get pretty intense. So if something bothers me, it oftentimes bothers me a lot, and I will get there very fast. And oftentimes that makes me do stuff or doesn't make me do stuff, but it encourages me, let's say, to do stuff that that's probably not the best way to handle things. And I know it's not the best way to handle things, but it is constantly a fight for me to be like, to rein that in. And the one thing that I'm really good at well, the one thing is that I'm really good at constructing bad outcomes and hyper-focusing on them. So here's a classic example, is that one time, it was like a Thursday or Friday, I can't remember, my boss emails me and says, hey, I want to talk to you Monday morning about something. And I constructed a scenario where I was going to get fired. And it wasn't working out. He was going to tell me I was fired. I started freaking out, and I was like so upset. I was crying and shit. Like, it was awful. It was really, really bad. And I was just in this terrible state the whole time. Nah, he was just going to talk to me about something we were working on. It's fine. I thought I was going to lose my job. We were going to be out on the street. And I lived as if that were what was going to happen, until I was told otherwise, until somebody externally told me, no, it's not like that. So it's really easy to for me to construct that stuff and do that. And that's something that's very difficult for me. I live in the future and some in the past, but I have a lot of trouble living in the present, and that's really tough. Now, I take some meds to help with this stuff. I take 4 different things. I take Lexapro, which is an SSRI. It's a lot like Prozac. Prozac was the original SSRI on the market in the US. Lexapro is essentially one of several variants that we've seen over the years across that. There also take something called Buspar, which is an anti-anxiety medication. It also seems to be effective at it seems to help increase the effectiveness of SSRIs for one reason or another. Oftentimes you'll see they don't really know why it does what it does, but it does. So it's interesting reading stuff about, like, I don't know, we gave it to mice, it didn't kill them, so we tried it in people, and it seems to work for most of them. I take Strattera, which is, I think up until recently, somebody else told me the last time I gave this talk, up until recently, that's a medication for ADHD. And up until recently, I think it was the only medication on the market that for ADHD that was not an amphetamine. Everything else is an amphetamine. I did take Adderall for a little bit, and for me, now some people have good success with it even if they have anxiety issues, but generally you kind of need to be careful giving speed to people who have anxiety disorders, just because what it ended up making me feel, I felt awesome the first like 2 or 3 days, and then about a month in, because you take the same dose every day and you get used to it, it just made me anxious and mad. And so it wasn't that fun. And I also take Klonopin, and that's a tranquilizer. It's kind of like Xanax or something like that. I take that as an as-needed basis. And I also see a therapist. That's a really key thing for me, is that I don't just, for me, you got to figure out if you got an issue, how to do what you got to do. But I see a therapist, and I actively do psychological therapy, not drug-based. So I do both. And for me, I go every 2 weeks, and we talk about how and why I do the things that I do, why I have the reactions that I have to things, and we come up with strategies to address those. And we do work kind of informally and somewhat formally using a concept called cognitive behavior therapy, which I could get into, but at the end of the day, it's proven pretty effective for people with anxiety disorders, like an 80% rate of improvement. And it's pretty interesting. So there's another thing called dialectic behavior therapy that has also shown good results for these kinds of things. And again, these are not drug-based. This is stuff where you're interacting with a therapist, and a lot of times I think of her as sort of like a coach, but a trained coach, not just sort of a life coach. You proclaim yourself that you know what to tell people what to do. But this is somebody who has training in this and can guide me into, these are exercises you can do, and those exercises are going to help you get through this stuff and change the way that you react to things. Change the actions that you take based on the environment that you're in and the stuff that happens in that environment. So that's pretty cool. Now, one of the interesting things is actually having a brain that works the way that mine does. It's actually kind of advantageous sometimes, particularly in the work that I do. I'm good at certain aspects of my job specifically because of the way my brain works. And for example, I tend to anticipate things like security issues pretty quickly. And I do that because I'm good at constructing potential outcomes based on, okay, this is going on, so what I could do is this could happen, and that could be a potential, like, attack vector or things like that. Or anticipating like what the needs are. How's that, if we do this over here, like on the server side, how's it going to impact our ability to do this thing over, say, on the client side? And I think I do that pretty well. And my experience has been, I was always kind of like, I don't know, isn't that just what everybody does? Because as human beings, we always assume that our own experiences are everybody else's. I'm just like, well, this is just normal, right? I actually found out that's something I'm good at and better than a lot of people at. Now, there's a lot of stuff I'm way worse at than a lot of people, than a lot of developers for sure. But that's something that I can bring, and it's specifically because my brain works the way that it does. I tend to be a pretty empathetic person. I tend to, which could be problematic, because I tend to internalize what's going on or what I perceive as people's emotions. I tend to internalize and take them on. I tend to construct, like, how must they be feeling, and put myself in their shoes. And oftentimes that can be almost debilitating for me, because it can, like, I see somebody who's sad and I become sad, right? And it could be like, oh man, this just ruins my day. I can't do anything. It really is hard for me to get out of it. At the same time, what that means is that I'm good at empathizing with, say, the people who are going to interact with the work that I do. Either the other people on the team, or particularly, if you see my other talk, I'll talk about this, empathizing strongly with the users of what I'm developing and how they're impacted by the choices that we make. And because at the end of the day, what we make is for them, not for us. And so empathizing with them gives me an ability to have some insight into that sometimes people aren't as good at. And that's something that I'm pretty good at. But it is because my brain works the way that it does. There's pluses and minuses. At the end of the day, the toughest thing with all this stuff is this idea of social exclusion. And it wasn't intentional. And it wasn't anybody who was necessarily saying, like, well, I'm going to socially exclude this person. But my experience was very much growing up, and well into my 30s, I felt like I was kind of the only person who was I often felt like I was the only person who was like this, that I kept failing at things because my brain worked the way that I did, and I couldn't sustain doing stuff when I was like, I know I'm capable of this, but why can't I sustain it? Why can't I stay focused and get as much work done as I need to get done? And if I could do this, I could be really successful and I could accomplish so much. And but stuff always seems like everybody else seems to be able to get stuff done, and they talk about how they're able to work a bunch, and it's just they're so focused and they're able to keep track of things and they're able to get all their tasks done, and they don't forget to pay their bills for 3 months in a row, and they don't forget to do X or Y, or they don't get all freaked out when somebody says something like, hey, I don't think your code's really good here, and they don't get really emotional about it. And why am I like this? And you feel so isolated from everybody else. And I think that's the thing that's hardest about it, that makes everything worse when you're a person who kind of maybe thinks the way I do, or has another kind of maybe non-neurotypical brain. You feel very alone, and you feel like nobody else, and you feel like nobody else has your same experiences. And I felt for a long time that I was just broken, that I couldn't exist in society. I was never going to be right, and eventually things were going to just end. That it always was going to fail, that I was always going to screw stuff up, that I was always going to be in a position where I could do big things, I could do cool things, I could be really productive, I could do the things that would put me in a great position career-wise, or family-wise, or relationship-wise, or any of those things, and I always screwed it up. And that you get to a point where you just feel like, I guess I just don't work in this world. And that's a really, really crushing feeling. It is the worst feeling to feel like you are not like anybody else and that you don't work. And that was really, really hard. But I want to talk a little bit about how these things affect us, too. So not just me. Those have been my experiences. And I'm doing a lot better now than I have 1 year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago. I think I'm doing a lot better. I still struggle with things every day. I still get too emotional. I still get too upset about stuff that I shouldn't get upset about. And those are always hard. But I am doing better because I keep working at it. And how does this stuff affect us? So I'm going to want to talk a little bit about sort of society in general. And what are the numbers that we talk about? I talked a little bit about myself, but is this a common thing or it's not? I feel like, when I talked about, you feel like you're the only person who's dealing with this, mostly because nobody else is talking about it. Turns out, let's just say in the US, most studies you see, at least 1 in 5 adults have a mental disorder, some sort of mental health issue that would qualify as a clinical diagnosis in any year in the US. That's 20% of people. That's a really, really high number. Most people might not realize that it's that high. So are we abnormal? Am I abnormal? No, not really. It's pretty common. In fact, anxiety disorders are the most common mental health disorder. I think depression is second. You have things like psychoses, you have eating disorders, there's lots of things that fall into that. But anxiety is really, really common. And as a side note, I think the way our society works has a lot to do with that. But it's very common, 20%. And you think about that's just 20% of people who have it. Now think about the amount of people who are impacted by it. People measure that at least 1 in 4. I would guess it's probably higher. 1 in 4 people, 25% of the population. At any given time, 25% of people who are sitting around you are dealing with it one way or another, are being impacted by it. It's affecting their lives significantly. So there's a study that was done by the World Health Organization. It was this huge study. It's called the Global Burden of Disease, and it was done in 2002, and I think it was released in 2004. And that's the most recent thing that they did, which was a widespread global overview of all disease in the US, or not in the US, in the world. And one of the things they talk about is the level of disability. And they talk about level of disability because a lot of times people with mental health issues, they don't present as sick. That is, they don't look sick. People don't probably look at me and say, oh, you know what, I bet that dude is comorbid. Right? I bet that dude has ADHD. They might pick it up after they talk to me a little bit, depending on sort of where I am. I bet that dude has an anxiety disorder. No, you don't pick it up. I can look it around. I can't pick out like people, but I guarantee you there's a good 20% of you are dealing with something right now, whether you know that you've been diagnosed or you kind of feel a certain way or things like that. But you don't present. It's not like you don't wear glasses for it, right? You don't have something that's on there. You don't have like an insulin pump. You don't have these signs that it's like, oh, that person is actually sick, right? But so they do this where they compare level of disability when they're talking about psychiatric disorders, and they talk about moderate depression, and they compare that level of disability that you have with moderate depression to multiple sclerosis or severe asthma, both of which can be very debilitating and dramatically interfere with your ability to just get around physically. With severe depression, they compare it to quadriplegia. That level of disability. That's very significant, very significant. They also have this metric that they talk about in the study called the disease burden, which is basically premature death and then also including years lived with a disability. And you get an idea for how a disease impacts a culture, how it impacts a society, and the amount to which it impacts it. So premature death is talking about like how do people die sooner because of this thing, how does that impact those kinds of things. Years lived with a disability is like how many years are you dealing with this thing that's going on and that's impacting your ability to be a quote-unquote normal functioning member of society, that you can cope in society that has certain expectations about how we all are and what things we're capable of. And in this study, the World Health Organization put forth, they said that the burden of mental disorders was the largest of all disorder categories in North America. That means it's higher than cardiovascular disease and higher than cancer. Now, the morbidity rate in terms of premature death is significantly lower. The years lived with disability is far, far higher, far higher. And this is a direct quote from that. In all regions, neuropsychiatric conditions are the most important causes of disability, accounting for around 1/3 of years lost to disability among adults aged 15 years and over. That is an enormous impact that it has on all societies. Enormous. And think about how willing we are to talk about that. And maybe our unwillingness to talk about that has a lot to do with why it's such a burden and why it goes on so long. We want to talk about economic costs and try to put some numbers forth to this. Mental health conditions, the second leading cause of workplace absenteeism. People who aren't at work generally don't work. Now, we're just talking about depression. Workers who have depression lose about 5.6 hours per week, and obviously that's rated over a whole year or something like that. Folks who don't have depression, 1.5 hours. That's a significant increase of people who deal with depression, which is one of the most common disorders that people have. Depression, again, just depression. Not talking about anxiety disorders, not talking about any of these other categories that we have to deal with. $43.7 billion in absenteeism from work. Lost productivity and direct treatment is an enormous cost, and a huge cost on the economy. But how much do we talk about it? How willing do we talk about it? Are we having serious conversations about how we deal with these things and how we do this in the workplace? And talking about the workplace, in 2014, middle of 2014, we did a survey called Mental Health in Tech, and just asked people questions, and I just distributed it on Twitter. I was like, hey, please, so you're self-selecting, you're getting people who are probably interested in this. But I wanted to get information about what people's attitudes were and fears were in the workplace. Because in the US, at least, the workplace is the primary conduit for healthcare. In other countries, it may be a little different, but I wanted to focus on the workplace. The other thing to think about the workplace is that it is probably the social group you spend the most time with. For better or for worse, you probably spend more time with the people you work with than anybody else. So we asked, I'm going to have some of these questions in here. I want to say this, we got responses from all over the world. We got people who are self-employed, not self-employed, and there's differences in that stuff. So these results I'm pulling from are only people in the US and only people who are employed by some other company. They're not self-employed. So one of these questions that I asked was, do you feel that your employer takes mental health as seriously as physical health? Again, think about that disease burden information we had from the World Health Organization. Now, they take it as seriously. Do I feel that my employer takes it as seriously? Only half said yes. 25% said don't know. 25% said no, absolutely not. They don't take it as seriously. Think about the economic costs we talked about. Do you think that discussing a health issue with your employer would have negative consequences? We compared physical and mental because we wanted to see the difference there. With physical, 3/4 said no, there wouldn't be any negative consequences. 19% said maybe. Maybe it depends on what it is. Maybe it depends on my bosses are jerks. And only 4% said yes. Only 4% said yeah, I would not want to talk about that. With mental health, only 36% said no, about a third. From 4% to a quarter said yes, there would be negative consequences if I discuss it. I absolutely believe there will be negative consequences. And almost 2/5, well, no, over 2/5 said maybe there would be. That is a huge difference. Would you bring up a health issue with a potential employer in an interview? This gets into some things you may not realize that the ADA, for the most part, makes it illegal to not hire someone on the basis of a health issue, unless even with reasonable accommodations, which is kind of reasonable accommodations is something that's vague and left up to legal interpretation, they could not do the job. It is illegal to not hire somebody based on that. Would you bring up a health issue with a potential employer in an interview? Physical? No, 44% probably wouldn't bring it up. Oftentimes, maybe not the thing you lead with, you know what I mean? Or maybe it's not relevant. Why would I bring it up? Don't want to make them think like it's going to be a deal when it's not. Maybe 44%, maybe I'd bring it up. But 12% said yes. Not a huge number, 12%. Let's look at mental health and see how people feel about that. Twice as many said no. 14%, only 14% said maybe, only 2% said yes. The prevalence of mental health issues tells us that there is I would say, very likely that a lot of the people interviewing do deal with those things, do deal with a mental health issue or a mental disorder. They are afraid to talk about it in an interview. Why are they afraid? Because they think they won't get a job because of it. And I hear over and over anecdotally from folks who come up and talk to me and they say, I know I have these issues, and how do I evaluate if a company is going to be accommodating or not when I'm interviewing? Because I'm afraid to even mention it. How do you figure that out? Do you know the options for mental health care your employer provides? Only 40% said yes. 32%, a third, said no. I don't know what they are. Not sure, 27%. That tells me that about 3/5 of folks it's not being discussed, they're not being told anything, or maybe they have something but it's stuck in the back of a 200-page handout that they got, and I don't know, it's probably in there somewhere, but I'm not really sure. Does your employer provide resources to learn more about mental health issues and how to seek help? Only a quarter said yes. Only a quarter. 20% of their employees definitely are dealing with something in a given year. And only a quarter of these folks can say that, yes, my company provides these resources. Almost 40% said no. Nope, they don't do that. Nope, nobody, they're not even addressing it at all. Don't know, maybe they've talked about it. I didn't really hear about it. Maybe it got mentioned once or twice. Another legal issue covered by the ADA that's the Americans with Disability Act. I don't know if I said that, ADA. Is your anonymity protected if you choose to take advantage of mental health or substance abuse treatment resources? Only 30% said yes. The majority say don't know. They don't know if their anonymity is going to be protected. And how many people are going to bring it up if they're kind of not sure? If they're scared, if they think it's something they're supposed to be afraid of, which is kind of what we're getting indicated here. This is the information we've got is that people are afraid to talk about it. So if they want to take advantage of resources to get better, most of them don't know what's going to happen. You are legally protected. You're supposed to, but they don't know, probably because they didn't talk about it. How easy is it for you to take medical leave for a mental health condition? A key issue that I hear over and over with people with mental health issues who are working in tech, is it okay that I can just say, you know what, I'm having a rough day right now because of this, and I'm going to take a day off? As opposed to having to lie and say, oh, you know what, I have to go see the doctor, or I've got the flu, or something like that. I've done all those things, lied about it, said, you know, whatever. I've got an appointment with my therapist, no, I'm just seeing the doctor. Okay, so 54% said don't know. So over half probably hasn't even been discussed. I don't know. It probably hasn't even been discussed. Now a couple say very easy or somewhat easy. So you're talking about, let me do math here quickly. So almost a third said that. And then somewhat difficult, very difficult. Maybe they've tried and it hasn't worked out so well. But over half don't even know. And the key thing is sick workers don't work. And you got 20% or higher. Now, I'm just going by general population. We don't have a lot of information about tech specifically. Got 20% at least of your employees who are dealing with this at any given time. They're significantly less productive or they don't work at all. Only 41% of people with mental health disorder in the US receive professional help in a given year. Only 41% are getting treatment of any kind. Now, specific to depression, half the people who seek help for depression wait 8 years or longer. That's 8 years that they've been dealing with this, suffering with this, unnecessarily. They could be working on this and getting help. And there's lots of things that can help. Maybe it doesn't fix everything for them magically, but it helps them cope, it helps them deal, it helps them learn how to get through things. The longer the delay, typically, the more difficult recovery is. And there's good evidence that people with a mental health problem are more likely to seek help if someone close to them suggests it. And oftentimes, the people, again, we spend the most time with, that we're pretty close with, are the people we work with. So is our workplace, is that social group being encouraging about it? Do they know the right things to say? Do they know how to help people get help? The impression that most tech workers have is that no, they don't. So I want to talk a little bit, I've run a little short on time, I'm going to kind of go through this quickly. So with things that you can do to make your workplace safe. And one of the things that we're doing with the Open Sourcing Mental Illness campaign is that we've used some of the money that we've gotten to try to create documents that cover some of this stuff that we can hand out to businesses, that we can hand out to folks, and you can say, these are the steps we need to take. And also advice related to ADA issues, specifically about mental health, aimed at employees and aimed at employers. And we've got a couple documents that we should be coming out with real soon for that. So we're talking about making your workplace safe. And I want to say a safe, encouraging, safe places for people with mental health issues, that they don't have to feel afraid in, that they don't have to feel ashamed or feel like there's going to be severe negative consequences because of it. The first key thing is that you need to get buy-in from your C-level folks. The people who are in charge of the organization set the values for that organization, and it comes from the top down. That is inevitable in every organization I've ever run into. What is valued by folks at the top becomes valued by everybody else in the organization. They set that tone. So those are folks you need to engage. And oftentimes, executives and even supervisory levels, folks like that, they are probably scared. Most of the time, I don't think that they're trying to be intentionally like mean or just don't care about you or things like that. I mean, I think we've all had experiences, or a lot of us have experiences or stories of bosses that seemed like they just did not care about what happened to us, or they weren't particularly empathetic. But my general feeling is that most people want folks to succeed. They want folks to be happy. But oftentimes they're scared. They're scared because they don't understand very well the legal ramifications of choices that they might make. And they're also personally just afraid of saying the wrong things. A key thing is to give them information. You share research, you share laws, you share information about how do you do the right things. What are the right things to say? What are the right policies to put into place? And part of that is sharing ways to support employees. That includes values like discouraging work hour martyrdom. How many of you regularly work up more than 40 hours a week, are asked to do that? Like, that's part of what you have to do, not just something where you're like, I'm just a fool and I'm going to spend all my time doing this. But you work more than 40 hours a week. Now, I work more than 40 hours a week too, but you make a choice. That's one thing if you make a choice. But there's a lot of places that will ask you to work more than that. Some places, they'll ask you to work 50 or more. There's good evidence, first off, that if you work more than 40 hours a week, that your productivity goes through the dumpster. As you start working more than 40 hours, your productivity drops off significantly. And after 50 hours, you might as well, it is better for you to not be doing anything because you're probably just screwing stuff up. And there is certainly, especially in startup culture, there is sort of this macho BS that says, well, you got to be pounding it, bro. And you've got to be putting in your 80 hours a week. Well, that's really not helpful. And it dramatically contributes to anxiety and stress. It's important to do things like enforce vacation before it's needed. Tell people to take time off. Maybe even give them rewards for taking time off so they don't get burned out. Don't wait for them to get burned out. Making sure that there's good coverage for mental health, because that's where you can, a C-level can make sure that that happens for the organization. Being transparent in the hiring process. I talked about people being afraid of that in interviews to bring it up. You should be bringing it up. You should tell people these are the things that we do to support you, both dealing with physical health issues and mental health issues. And cognitive wellness strategies, which we'll talk about a little bit, but generally things that help people day-to-day kind of prevent mental health issues. Second thing, and I feel really strongly about this, is doing mental health first aid. And mental health first aid is something that I think all supervisors and managers should do. It is a program, and it's all across the country and in 22 other countries. And you can get training for it. You just look up a trainer in your area, and it provides explicit training for supporting mental health needs. I feel very, very strongly that all of your executives, all your managers and HR people, and even just employees need to get that kind of training. But it's particularly helpful for folks who have to interact with folks. people who maybe have to talk with people about tougher issues, people who are expected to support and encourage and lead people. And it is really cheap. I paid $50 for it in the US, and I just paid for that myself. I've heard of it being much cheaper in other areas in the US. And I honestly think you're going to use it way more than traditional first aid. You're going to use it all the time, just interacting with people, learning how to speak, how to listen, how to interact empathetically, and how to encourage people to seek help. Third thing is knowing your local resources and researching those in your community and compiling them in one place. One quick thing is there is nothing like a Yelp for mental health resources. So I can't find like, oh, what's a good support group for people with anxiety disorders in my area? It is likely that there's a very good chance that is nowhere listed on the internet. Your best idea is to contact a local chapter of an organization like NAMI or mentalhealthamerica.net or some other organization that in your community specifically deals with this stuff, and you call them on the phone and you say, hey, I'm out of business and I'm trying to compile local resources for folks so they can seek help and we can encourage them if they need it. Help me, because they know what's going on. They have boots on the ground. Knowing what your coverage is really important. Making your mental health coverage transparent. It's not something that's hidden somewhere in the employee handbook that nobody ever reads. Making sure that there's company disclosure of that benefits plan and giving everybody an opportunity to meet with the insurance rep to answer questions, really key. And fifth, actively engaging and educating. And that deals with things like awareness. There's a great organization called Prompt at nhprompt.org. I think it's org. Is it org? Yeah, okay, good. I had com for a while and I think it didn't work. nhprompt.org, they specifically pay people to go and talk to people at conferences like this. They and to interact with companies, to talk with them about the experiences people have. That awareness stuff is so key. And so when I was talking about the stuff that I'm dealing with, that's awareness there, and keeping in mind, like, what is it like? Raising those kinds of things up. Also, dealing with resources like the local online stuff, tools, things like that, bringing that stuff together, collecting that, and making that available to everybody. And then this promotion of mental wellness. And these are sort of life skills to help prevent illnesses. Educating people about psychology and psychiatry in a public forum, and talking in a company meeting or like a weekly meeting to summarize things. Have we talked about this? Do you guys know that you can deal with this and it's okay? Teaching techniques and best practices. That's stuff like dealing with burnout and stress, mindfulness, things of that nature. Maybe if you're in a large organization, consider having a peer-to-peer support group for some of these things, like anxiety disorders, depression, things like that. And then promoting proactive practices. And those are things that are not magic silver bullets, but things like exercise, nutrition, getting enough rest, making sure people are socially included, and peer support. Folks being supportive of one another and being empathetic of one another, making it feel like it's okay to have this kind of stuff, to deal with this stuff. That stuff is really key to helping folks not suffer with this. Then the sixth thing is supporting research. And the funny thing is that the OSMI thing, apparently, that survey that I did in 2014, one of the only surveys, actually probably the only survey I've been able to find that specifically deals with folks in the tech industry and how they perceive mental health issues. There's almost no research done. And it's very possible that among, say, the developer community, the kinds of things that people deal with are not the same kinds of things that, say, the general populace deals with. Maybe there's higher percentages of things like ADHD or anxiety disorders. Maybe, maybe not, I don't know. But the thing is, we don't know. And if we do, we're going to be able to better treat those kinds of things and like what kinds of things we need to focus on that's going to help the most people. So, a quick thing, I'm running low on time, but what's the upside here? First thing is you get higher productivity and motivation because employees feel valued. If an employer acts like they give a crap and they're really concerned about your wellness across the board, they are more committed to that employer. You get reduced absenteeism, we talked about that. You tend to contain costs on health insurance because you're doing proactive stuff that helps treat those things. You're getting treatment sooner, so it doesn't take as long to go through that process. People tend to be loyal more, and we talked about that. Turnover is a pain for companies, and to pull in new people and to train them and stuff like that. These kind of practices keep there's very good evidence that that companies that institute mental health friendly practices have documented remarkably low turnover rates. You get to hire and promote the most qualified people because you're getting a larger pool when you're openly supporting mental health friendly policies. More people want to work for you. And if you're concerned about embracing diversity, that includes embracing diversity with people who have different neurotypical or not typical issues. People who live with mental illnesses, including those kinds of folks, that's diverse. So you don't ignore it. You don't kind of ask them not to say anything about it. You embrace that, you're empathetic with them, and you accommodate them. So real quickly, we did this campaign for open sourcing mental illness in 2015. I had to raise some money to go talk, and I didn't have that money. So I did a thing where I had this Indiegogo campaign. I had a goal of $5,000, which would get me to go to 2, 3, maybe 3 conferences in a year. And our time, we hit that goal, which was basically I just posted about it on Twitter. That was pretty much it. We hit that in 2 hours. That was really cool. It told me that people actually do care about this, that this matters. And the total raise was $13,600. That's an enormous amount of money. It was a huge amount. And with that extra money, I was able to go to a lot more conferences. I was able to engage people who actually have knowledge of like organizational psychology and things like that, to engage them and get them involved in creating some of these documents we talked about how to implement mental health friendly practices in the workplace. So that was a huge thing. This is a list of people who have donated, well over 100 different people, and some people donated, $10, $5. I had some people donate $500, $1,000. It was amazing, really, really amazing. And all those folks, it's very humbling too, that all those folks had enough trust in me to do this. It's really cool. One other place that I really want to thank is GraphStory. That's the company that I work for. And they let me take time to go do these things. I do still have to do some work, but they let me go do this because they think it's important. Because even as a little 3-person startup where everybody's busting their butt to try to get stuff done and you got to step up and you got to get things done, they know that the stuff that I'm talking about is accurate. That companies that support mental health and support mental wellness are companies that keep employees, and that it's just the right thing to do. You want people to be happy, to feel valued, to be productive. So what I need from you is I just need your help talking about this, sharing about it, learning more about it. If you want to, you can see videos and slides and resources at funkatron.com/OSMI. I try to record every one of these talks, and I've got about 20 up. They are all CC licensed, including the slides, so you can show these to anybody you want to. You can use these in other opportunities. You can take the slides and use them in your own stuff and just ask for attribution, that's it. If you want to donate, money helps because it allows us to do more stuff. It allows me to go to more conferences. It allows us to do more development in terms of the documentation that we're trying to get out. It allows us to develop resources that's going to make it easier for companies to implement these kinds of policies. So if you want to donate, you can go to j.mp/OSMI2015. It's still part of that 2015 campaign, and they have an ongoing process for that. So thanks for listening. We're running late, so I can't really take any questions, but I'd ask you please come up and talk to me afterwards. And if you want to rate this talk, there's a joined in link down up behind my head. Here, I'll go listen. I'm going to go look at it. And they changed the way their URLs work, so I have to go joined/talk/831AD. And that's the one. So if you want to go rate it, what worked for you, what didn't, I'd really appreciate that. So again, if you got questions, feel free to just hit me up after this, and thanks for your time. I really appreciate it.